Good afternoon. We are delighted to welcome you to the NMC On the Horizon on crowdsourcing. The NMC On the Horizon series reflects the research and work of the NMC Horizon Project in action. In these Google Hangouts on Air, panels of experts are convened across all education sectors to address the emerging technologies poised to significantly impact teaching and learning. In today's one-hour Hangout, the NMC's own Sam Becker will moderate this live panel discussion on crowdsourcing. I'm your host today, Alex Freeman, Director of Special Projects at the NMC. Michelle Cummins is joining me on technical support, so if you have a question with your tech, go ahead and drop it in the chat box. Okay, so sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy the following discussion. But first, a bit of logistics. In this session, if you have a question, you can type it into the Q&A, and also +1 a question that you're interested in having answered. We'll collect your questions throughout the session and sprinkle them in as we can. Now on to the moderator of today's webinar. Samantha Becker is Senior Director of Communications for the New Media Consortium. She's the director of the NMC Horizon Project and lead writer and researcher for the NMC Horizon Report series, which analyzes emerging technology uptake in various education sectors across the globe. She has an expertise in digital communications with a special interest in e-publishing, social media, and online learning. Previous to the NMC, Samantha facilitated the digitization of books and periodicals for several of the world's largest publishers and was the managing editor of a lifestyle magazine. Take it away, Sam.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's such an honor to be here, especially among such a brilliant group of panelists. Certainly the work of the NMC Horizon Project is really relevant today. The topic is crowdsourcing, and many of the projects and examples seen in the Horizon Report series are actually crowdsourced by our NMC members and the broader EdTech community. That's how we generate a lot of visibility about in-practice examples that are reflecting emerging technologies in action. So I'm especially excited to hear from our panelists today. So thank you all so much for joining me. First things first, let's get to know everyone a little bit. So I'm going to go around, and if everyone could just share a little bit about yourselves. And we will start with you, the lovely and talented Lori Bird Phillips, Digital Marketing Content Coordinator and the former Wikipedian in residence at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis.
Hi, Sam. Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm the Digital Marketing Content Coordinator here at the Children's Museum, which is actually the largest children's museum in the world. I'm also very involved in the GLAM Wiki community. So this is a community of Wikipedians who help museums, libraries, and archives share content with Wikipedia. And I made my way into the Children's Museum as their first Wikipedian in residence. Now I manage all of our social media and our blog. My personal research and my master's research centers around this idea of open authority, which is a term that I coined to describe the coming together of institutional expertise with community contributions in informal learning environments. So that's what I'll be chatting about today.
Excellent. Thank you, Lori. I'd love to hear a little bit about Heather Chirtea, founder and executive director at Digital Wish.
Hi, I'm the executive director of Digital Wish, and we run a nonprofit that puts technology in schools. We have a number of really cool online crowdsourcing tools that you guys will be able to just immediately use. There's stuff that just takes 5 minutes to set up for a crowdsource fundraiser, and then you can raise money for technology into your schools. We have one for technology, and then another one for running a t-shirt campaign and crowdsourcing money that will go into your technology program. And then we also have one for yearbook building. We have a lot of tips for you in terms of how to run a successful fundraiser with crowdsourcing.
Excellent. Can't wait to hear more from you a little later on, Heather. Now on to Emory Craig, Director of eLearning at the College of New Rochelle.
Hi, everyone. Yes, Director of eLearning, and I have to say I kind of came to my current position in a roundabout way. My background is in philosophy and communication studies, and then I was in the art world, actually part of the new museum and a gallery director in Soho for a number of years, and then back into higher education. Taught for 10 years and then moved over to my current position.
Thanks, Emory. Looking forward to hearing from you. And then last but certainly not least, we have Jan Sutton, zookeeper of reptiles and amphibians at the Virginia Zoological Park.
Hello, my name is Jan Sutton. I'm the regional coordinator for Frogwatch USA, and my main interest is the Field Scope program that we run, which allows us to be part of a citizen science program with the general public and they can work in collaboration with professionals, collecting annuring calls, actually describing who's who, and fulfill our role of conservation education within our zoo and our association community.
Thanks so much. Jan is surrounded by animals at the zoo, so if you hear any loud roars or anything like that, do not be alarmed. The tiger cannot get you through the screen. Now moving on to some of our content, to the heart of the matter for today. Before we delve into exciting tools and ways we can use crowdsourcing, the best thing that we can do so we're all on the same page and show different ways that crowdsourcing is being perceived and considered, let's a few of us take a moment to define what crowdsourcing is in the context of our own environments.
To me, crowdsourcing is really just the beginning. It's really just one facet of this wider spectrum of open authority. And again, this open authority is a deeper collaboration and a transactional dialogue between an institutional expert and then community members. So open authority basically means that it's not that the museum or the expert is necessarily always right. It's not that the crowd is always right. It's that we can make it even better together. So this spectrum goes from more conservative approaches to participatory programs to more progressive approaches. And it begins with contributory projects and then moves on to more collaborative projects, and then the ideal is co-creative projects. And so crowdsourcing really encompasses more of this first end of the spectrum, which is more contributory. And that's where the organization is actually often more the leader, where participants are more passive. Community sourcing is actually what you'll hear me mentioning a lot today. There's nothing wrong with crowdsourcing. I think it's great. It's just the beginning. Like community sourcing, I feel like, is this deeper level of engagement. It's a bigger ask you're making of a more loyal community. And so that's more of a collaborative approach. And then, of course, co-creation and then moves to this true participatory interpretation where the community takes part in the project really from the beginning to the end. So that's the perspective I'll be coming at today.
Thank you so much, Lori. Heather, I'm really interested in hearing how you define crowdsourcing at Digital Wish.
We define it as fundraising, essentially. Crowdsourcing and fundraising are very similar. They're related. They're not exactly the same thing, but in our context, what we do is we give teachers online tools that they can use to create a campaign. So there's always this sort of definite campaign where there's a cause, a mission, something you're trying to raise money for, and then there's a goal. And then beyond that, as you reach out to your community, you really have to go out to your social networks. So your Facebook network, your parents, your teachers. I love this concept of the community crowdsourcing idea, because on Digital Wish and with the tools that we use, they don't work unless you engage your whole community in the crowdsourcing endeavor, whatever that may be. So that's how we define it, more from a tools perspective.
Great, that will certainly come in handy, especially when we get to talk about the execution of strategies. And so now that we've defined crowdsourcing, I'm curious just to get your perspective on how it's actually being implemented in your current environments.
Well, we haven't really made extensive use of it at the College of New Rochelle, but we're looking into it. I mean, I really see it as partly as fundraising, but also as distributed problem solving, as a way of drawing the expertise of the larger community. And I know some of our faculty are already looking into small projects. For example, we have some that work on doing ecology projects along the Bronx River and like that, and looking for ways to provide additional funding for something like that, and even to draw in additional people, scientists that are doing work on the restoration of the watershed in that area, which, as you can imagine, in the New York City environment, it's in pretty bad shape to begin with. So.
Thank you, Emory. And Lori, I know a couple projects that you've done that I'd love to hear about.
Well, at the Children's Museum, we've developed a model for recurring digital engagement projects, and this started out as a crowdsourcing initiative and has kind of grown from there. And we define digital engagement projects as interactive projects that encourage visitors to participate online and on-site. So they always include a social component, a web, and then an on-site component. And our first digital engagement project was called 100 Toys That Define Our Childhood. And it was a community-curated display here at the museum where we asked online visitors first to vote for their favorite toy out of a list of 100 to help us define top 20 toys that we then put on display. And most importantly, they shared stories and memories about these toys. And this just ended up exploding. It got some local attention and then national attention, and ended up going international. And we were really blown away by it. From there, that's why we started doing these recurring projects. So that's one of the main ways we do crowdsourcing here at the Children's Museum.
Thank you, Lori, and I've really enjoyed following along on that project. I knew you blogged about it a little bit, so I definitely encourage the audience to check out some of Lori's posts for even more information. Heather, how are you using crowdsourcing right now at Digital Wish?
We're using it in a lot of different ways. The main way is the fundraising way that I talked about before, but we have an incredible collection of fundraising tools at digitalwish.org that anybody can go and sign up for. They're totally free for teachers, and they're designed to make it easy for you to run a campaign. So we have a lot of our user base actually coming onto Digital Wish and creating their crowdsourcing campaign on our digitalwish.org platform and reaching out to their networks. I'll give you an example of some of the fundraisers that have been really successful. We had one lady who did a fundraiser for iPads, and she raised a few $1,000s just by doing a Facebook campaign out to the parents in her local community. There was another school that was trying to raise money for little science gadgets and monitors and Lego robotics parts, and they did a whole campaign on Digital Wish and raised lots of money. But, you know, again, the key is going to be outreach. From a personal perspective, I've done something called a Kickstarter campaign. I don't know if anybody's heard about those, but my kids are musicians, and they were trying to raise money to make their first album, and so they actually went and set up a whole Kickstarter campaign and reached out to the general public and their fan base. So that was a little different way to do it. But teachers, as you know, a really fun project to do is to get your kids involved. So we can talk about that a little more. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, Heather. And you raise a really good point. So crowdsourcing is sort of an all-encompassing term that does include what's called crowdfunding. Platforms like Kickstarter and others are used to actually fund projects. I've seen at schools, for example, I know Penn State University, there's been a wildly successful project of students who actually developed a Mars rover companion to get funded to go to the moon. So I think crowdfunding is a really important kind of next wave, or current wave rather, of crowdsourcing. So because this is the Horizon Project and our focus is always teaching and learning and creative inquiry, I would love to get a sense for you or how you think that crowdsourcing could really enhance teaching and learning. So Emory, coming from the College of New Rochelle, perhaps you're a great place to start for this.
Well, I think it's got tremendous opportunities. I mean, if you just look at what's already been done, for example, with DonorsChoose.org, I mean, that site has been so wildly successful. I mean, we've had so many debates over the K through 12 environment with top-down reformers and the education establishment on the other hand. And Donors Choose has been able to kind of thread right through the middle of that by just letting teachers post needs that they have. And interestingly enough, most of the projects are very low amounts of money, like under $400. I think the average amount is about $380 or something like that. They've now raised $225 million all across the country. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. And 175,000 teachers have been helped, over 400,000 projects. And the comedian Stephen Colbert, who's a board member now, says that it combines the efficiency of data mining with the intimacy of a neighborhood. And there is not a more friendly site on the web. And I think it's just an ideal model for some of the things that we can do, both in K through 12 and in higher education.
Really well said. Thank you, Emory. Over to you, Lori. I know the museum sector is more of an informal learning sector, but certainly there's large gains for teaching and learning over there with crowdsourcing.
My other side of my life here with all this Wikipedia stuff, I mean, contributing to Wikipedia is definitely one obvious example of crowd or community sourcing, which has huge implications for learning. You know, Wikipedia is actually a really important tool for learning 21st century skills, from thinking critically about online sources to understanding this asynchronous knowledge creation as you're researching and editing. So I ran a program through the Children's Museum actually to train middle and high school students that are volunteers here already existing at the museum to research iconic objects around the museum. And they worked in teams to create Wikipedia articles. And they were extremely motivated by this real-life aspect of the project. You know, what they were creating wasn't just going to their teacher and being forgotten about. It was going out there on Wikipedia. And not only that, but it was even, articles were translated in multiple languages, and then that access increased exponentially from there. And so this project with Wikipedia made a huge impact on these students. And the GLAM wiki community, which I'm a part, as I said, helping libraries, archives, and museums, they have a lot of resources. But there's this whole other second group of Wikipedians that work, the Global Education Program and now the Wiki Ed Foundation, that help establish resources for classroom teachers, all different levels, a lot of undergrad and graduate levels, working with professors to help contribute to Wikipedia. So there's a lot of resources out there.
I think that's a great example. And speaking of resources, I know, Heather, you're quite the expert when it comes to tools and technologies for helping people execute their crowdsourcing strategies. So I'd love to hear a little bit about some of your recommendations and ideas.
Yeah, sure. A couple things. I'm going to start by talking about the teaching and learning element because it's so important. Crowdfunding, as opposed to crowdsourcing, which is we sort of fall on that crowdfunding side, is a fantastic entrepreneurial idea if you're trying to get the kids excited about learning about business. There's so many fantastic sites out there that are really good for creating a fundraising campaign where your students can actually come together and, as, let's say, the student council, they can run a campaign to raise money for whatever it is that you want to raise money for in your school. Now they'll have to create the website, they'll have to create the campaign, they'll have to launch it and go and learn about social networking, they'll have to build a budget, they'll have to set a goal, all of these things. It's all great, very practical learning experiences that tie directly back in with practical real-world business. And so it's, from the teaching and learning perspective, it's a fantastic tool to do a classroom activity or a lesson plan around that. So in terms of tips for how to be successful, the crowdsourcing campaigns on our site that work really well are the ones where a teacher has taken an active role in actually reaching out to the community. So you don't want to just put your campaign up, it's there, and then you say, oh, I'm done, I got it, it's online, and now money's going to come rolling in. Because it doesn't come rolling in unless you actually reach out to your network, unless they know that that plea is there. And so our most successful crowdfunding endeavors have been with educators who will, A, print flyers out for their parents, B, run a social networking campaign out to parents. We've had tremendous success with letter writing campaigns. So this is something we actually did down in our local school. I was in charge of a school renovation project for our local elementary school, and my task was to do all the fundraising, and the school was about to be closed down, and we actually engaged the students in letter writing. We targeted Home Depot to win a Kaboom grant, which is a really cool organization for fundraising, and we had the kids actually write letters to the president of those organizations and tell exactly what they were trying to raise money for. And the checks just started coming in. They would go online, they'd make donations, they would send checks. We also sent out like materials lists of things that we need out to the local community, and when it was all said and done, we raised over $20,000 in about 3 months. We renovated an entire playground and the school's technology lab. We repainted the school, and we got huge community involvement, and it changed the face of the school because the community members would say, you know, I didn't know what the school needed. I wanted to help. I knew the school was in trouble and I wanted to help, but I just didn't know how. And so that's what some of these crowdfunding campaigns can do for you, is they can give you a mechanism or give you a way to say, here's exactly what I need, you know, make this donation or drop off this, whatever it is, a 2x4, a can of paint, or a computer at the school, because that's what we're hunting for.
Absolutely, and I really like what you said earlier about ongoing maintenance being key. Once a campaign is launched, you can't just step back and wait for the magic to happen. You have to constantly be nurturing to it and engaging with the community that you're asking to support you. That's key. Really good tips. Thank you so much, Heather. It looks like Jana's back in action. So Jana, I'd love to give you an opportunity to talk about how your work with crowdsourcing relates to teaching and learning.
Yeah, we work with a platform called FieldScope that's powered by National Geographic, and it basically allows our general public or any of our volunteers that we have with ProgWatch to access the internet and access different ways to find out who is recording what calls and who is hearing what kind of frog calls, because that's basically what our Frog Watch program is about. And they can kind of go on the field scope and actually access any information from professionals such as zookeepers such as myself, or curators from other zoos and institutions. And it kind of puts them in link with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums to kind of work hand in hand and collaborate with professionals. And we're actually starting to work with diversity and inclusion, where we're adding more demographics and more of the general public, such as like students and teachers, as well as the general volunteers who come to us and ask to be part of our program.
Fantastic. I've actually been fortunate enough really to use the Frog Watch tools and the Field Scope tools firsthand, and I think they're excellent resources in terms of engaging not only local communities but groups of students and actively contributing observations to real science. So major kudos to you and the work you're doing, Jan.
Thank you.
Before we move on to some of the other questions, we actually have a good question from the audience, and it's for you, Lori. Certainly in the past several years, there has been some backlash about the use of Wikipedia in academics and in other ways, but certainly as crowdsourcing has become more successful and more accepted, are you noticing a shift in attitude and the reception of Wikipedia?
Absolutely, both in the museum field and in the academic field. We like to say that it was 2012, we say, in the museum world was our watershed moment for Wikipedia. We had the opportunity to attend the American Alliance of Museums conference, and it was really incredible to kind of see everyone kind of their eyes open to what the real possibility is. It's really just educating people about the true use of Wikipedia, both in informal and formal learning environments. That it's not about the fact that things can be edited at a moment's notice and changed and everything goes wrong. That doesn't actually happen as much as you think that it would. And actually, the late, amazing, great Adrienne Wadewitz was a leader in the Wikipedia community, and she was a professor, a literature professor, and she liked to say that to experts and to professors and to historians and everybody, your brilliant contributions will be made better, not worse. People don't come in and mess up what you're going to put in there. They're going to be improving upon it. And so when people realize that, I think that makes all the difference.
I think that's really well said, and really integrates the idea of collective intelligence, that everyone is an expert in something in the world, and so being able to share that expertise in an easy manner with people is key to knowledge sharing. So we've talked a little bit about how it can impact teaching and learning and some tools and technologies to make it happen, but what are some of the things that are necessary to make a crowdsourcing campaign successful?
Well, I think a couple of us could talk about this, Heather, especially in terms of doing something, but to just give you an example, you have to do something that is well designed. I think there has to be a certain level of media savviness to this. It has to be something that grabs you right away. I mean, one of the things that's happening with crowdsourcing, of course, is that it's really taken off because of our use of mobile devices and social media. So it's kind of omnipresent. It's right there in front of us. And I'm just thinking, for example, on the way up on the train today to the college, I was on my phone and I went to Kickstarter for a minute, and there's this wonderful project called Kibo, which is basically to create little wooden building blocks for kids that end up being very primitive robots. And what it really does is it teaches them programming skills. And 5 minutes of reading that, and then I'm donating $5 to this project, and they're that much closer to their goal. And it was just a very simple, fascinating project. And it's not that maybe we want all kids to learn programming, but just to get the concepts down, I think is fascinating. And it's just a wonderful kind of project to start with. And, but when I looked at it after I did it and I donated, I looked back at it and went, okay, this was just very well designed up front. It was they made their goals very, very clear. They were very well articulated in terms of what they were doing. They weren't asking for too much. Their goals were all very reasonable and seemed like something that was a very worthwhile project when it just comes together. And of course, they haven't met their goal yet, but they look like they will. They're 29 days to go on Kickstarter, and I got a feeling they're going to get there.
I think that's a testament to the power of good and clear storytelling. If you're trying to get community involved, you really got to articulate the message properly and effectively to any number of people. Thank you, Emory. That's really good advice. Heather, any advice on people looking to be successful in their strategies?
Yeah, tell a story, because people like to donate to something that they can jump on board with. And I wish I had a computer is not nearly as compelling as we're going to go out back behind the school and study the wetland, and we're going to use the webcam to take pictures of frogs and wildlife, and we're going to create a calendar, and the funding is going to go to create a community calendar. So it's come up with a story or something that gives you some sort of emotional appeal, or something that you can relate to, that you like. If I was a science person, I really like that project. But just saying I want some computers, well, I want some computers too. Why should I give to the school? So you want to create an emotional appeal and find something that people can latch onto and really create a connection. So
I think that's fantastic insight. Thank you, Heather. And what about you? Do you have some thoughts on that, Jan?
Yeah, I actually agree with Heather. Especially with Frogwatch, you do have to create a story, but you have to give an incentive to who's following you and actually make them feel important, like they need this process. Also, it's kind of like it helps out with the community when everybody kind of works together and they feel like they are doing something for the good with each other. I found that out with a lot of our volunteers, where when they're working together with this Frogwatch program that we run, that they are making quite the difference in all of our wetlands around here.
Well said. Thank you, Jan. We kind of talked about some current projects that we're working on in the current landscape of crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, but what do we think the next wave is? What's coming next? What can educators and other sorts of people anticipate to be ahead of the curve on crowdsourcing?
Well, going back to this, spectrum of open authority and this ideal kind of future vision of co-creation, I really think that, again, crowdsourcing is just the first step, and that in the future it'll be much more about co-creation and really having deeper levels of engagement with that community, incorporating perspectives and voices into the creation of the project from the very beginning, through the process and then at the end, so that everyone's working together on this. And in the museum field, a big thing we do is Post-it notes and exhibits, right? So like feedback from the community and exhibits, and that's a great thing right now, and we like to do that. It's very forward-thinking in some ways. Maybe this is a little crazy, but I like to say that in the future we may look at this Post-it note thing as actually really horrifically hierarchical and taboo, that it is actually furthering this omniscient voice of the curator, and that this is what really you should think, but here's all the other kind of things that are being added on at the end. So again, we need to be empowering the visitor, empowering our communities to insert their voices into crowdsourcing, community sourcing, co-creation, and that's what I really think the future will be about.
Really well said, and something you said really just struck me. And thinking about my favorite philosopher, or one of my favorite philosophers, a girl can't have just one, Walter Benjamin, he always said something along the lines of true art is participatory, so it's not something that just one person, the artist, makes. Art really comes alive when there's audience involvement or community involvement. And this was a couple hundred years ago, and I think that sentiment really rings true today, and I think crowdsourcing really helps to capture that and make it a more well-connected participatory experience, building communities within your classroom, building communities from, within museums, building partnerships from outside of a university into the surrounding community. It's about getting people together and uniting them around really specific causes. So at least that's something that's inspiring me.
Yeah, and I have to also point out Trevor Owens, who does a lot of work on crowdsourcing, he's with the Library of Congress, he always likes to say that it's not about the product, it's about the process of the crowdsourcing. So often when we first started doing these crowdsourcing projects, it was about what are we trying to get out of the crowd, right? But really, and I think it was with his examples are around the Civil War transcription of letters. And the community really dove into it and loved the process so much that it really motivated them to keep going, and they lived it. So I think that's an important thing to point out too, is it's really all about the process and not just the product.
I think that's really well said. The journey, not the destination. What about you, Emory? What do you see coming down the pipeline?
Well, I think there's going to be some very innovative things that are just going to be really imaginative. One example that comes to mind is the news last week that Citizen Science Group got permission to contact and reboot a 36-year-old satellite. This is the first time that NASA has ever basically taken a decommissioned spacecraft and given it over to private use. And you know, it's just a fascinating project because, of course, the group had to go online, raise $125,000 to do this. The hardware is non-existent from that period, so basically they're having to do virtual recreations of the hardware so that they can talk to the satellite. They have communicated with it at this point. What they're now going to try to do is to reestablish it back in Earth orbit again and start using it one more time. And it's just a, you know, sort of fascinating development of people taking, here's something that was done many, many years ago, very innovative in its day, that of course now the technology is so antiquated that NASA basically just turned it off and said, forget about it, we don't need this anymore, it's just going to wander around out in space. And students and citizen scientists and faculty and scientists all coming together, former NASA people, and saying, you know, we can do something really fascinating with this. And nobody knows if ultimately it's going to work. They have actually a very small window of opportunity to restore its Earth orbit. But it's, again, it's the process. It's trying to do it. And, of course, if something happens with this, they can actually get some good scientific data out of it if it works.
Thanks, Emory. That sounds like definitely a fabulous project to watch. And Heather, I know you have some take on the future of mobile crowdsourcing. We'd love to hear about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so much you can do with your mobile phone now. There's apps out there now that you can get when you're thinking about just bringing crowds of people together to get an opinion. There's survey-taking apps that you can get on your mobile device. And if you ask the kids, you know, to reach in their back pocket or their backpack, they're going to be able to pull up some kind of a mobile device that probably supports apps, and most of them will probably have a better mobile phone than you do, which is typically the case. So, I think a lot of it's going to go on to our handheld devices. Computers, we're going to see a lessening role for computers in crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, all of those things, and we're going to see things where donations on mobile devices are easy, where voting on mobile devices are much easier than it is today, and that trend is just going to continue until the entire universe will actually fit into our hip pocket. So that's where I see it going. I also had a tip from what we were talking about before in terms of how to create a successful crowdsourced fundraiser. Here's one of the things that we learned when we were trying to do that huge school renovation project. A Kickstarter does this really well, and it's that you want to give people a tangible thing to participate in. So I'll give you an example. We were trying to raise money through crowdsourcing for a playground, and so we had to raise thousands of dollars to get this playground equipment. So instead of going out and saying, we're trying to raise $5,000 or $10,000, what we did was we said, sponsor the jungle gym for $25, buy one stair to the sliding board for $50, buy the entire sliding board for $600. And so we had all these little, they were very artificial tiers that we created in the quantity of things that we had to purchase, and we let people pick out a thing that they liked. So they could sponsor a digital camera, they could sponsor a piece of equipment, they could sponsor, you know, a smaller element. And that's one of the things like that Kickstarter does really well. We were talking about the Kickstarter campaign and how you can donate money to various causes there. Well, what they do really well is they say, like for a musician, if they're trying to raise money for an album, you can pre-buy an album for $20. You can buy a poster for $10 that's signed. You can get the musician to come to your house for $500, which is, you know, nothing more than a car ride down the street, but actually results in a larger donation to the cause. So try and think, you know, step outside of what your project is and ask yourself, are there little chunks? Can we chunk this out somehow if we're trying to raise a sort of larger sum of money so that people feel like they made a difference or they had a connection with one particular thing? So that's something that's worked really well for a lot of our fundraisers.
Oh, makes good sense to me. And Heather, we actually have a question from the audience for you, just following that mobile thread. They want to know, does Digital Wish, are they still involved in the creation of mobile books?
Yeah, we are. We're working on some back-end technology right now to make the ebook builder a little bit more robust to support huge numbers of people. What happened was we got to a stage in the development of the ebook builder where a whole lot of people were coming all at once, and our servers started to not be able to handle the traffic. So they're shoring up some of those traffic issues right now through the back end, and then probably by fall, by September, we'll be coming out with that tool in a larger way. It's the ebook builder is there. You can use it. It's free. It's online. But we aren't doing like a huge expansion, and probably until the fall, until that technology is up to par. So that's coming soon. That's actually collaborative book writing for ebooks for all your mobile devices. So that's exciting.
Ooh, crowdsourced book writing. I love it.
Yeah.
Sounds very relevant. Definitely keep us posted.
Yeah.
And then, Jan, over to you. I'd love to hear your take on the future of citizen science, crowdsourced science.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm very excited about it. FieldScope is fairly new, especially for our area, so we haven't really done anything for more than a year so far, but I can see as we go along that there's going to be patterns that are going to emerge, and there's going to be citizen scientists that develop a lot of good data that I can't wait to actually graph and actually put together and put numbers to. And as far as our FrogWatch chapters across the United States, I think we're up to about 100 to 108 chapters now. So the more we go with this FieldScope program, the more data we're going to collect, and the more we're going to learn about our actual wildlife that we have out there. My most important contribution I can think of is that I deal a lot of work with our local state parks and wildlife areas, and there's been instances where using our FrogWatch program and the actual FieldScope, the FieldScope was kind of the backup and evidence to the information that we're receiving, so we can actually go to those other professionals and say, hey, look, our citizen scientists are finding very viable data that we can use for the long term of the program that we're running. So yeah, I'm actually very excited to see where this is all going to take us.
Great, and just to throw this out there for those teachers and professors, instructors we have here in the audience, what's the best way for them to get involved, especially those teaching science, to get involved with FrogWatch right now?
Right now, the best way to get involved is to go to the website, the FrogWatch website, which is www.aza.org/FrogWatch, and you can actually look onto the website and learn more information about FrogWatch and what it completely entails. And just get up with your local chapter and regional coordinators, like I'm one of the ones in Virginia. Just get up with us and we'll give you more information, and we're looking forward to actually include more students into our program, because right now it really is more of an adult base on who wants to actually come and volunteer, and we're trying to open our arms out to the younger ones that haven't experienced wildlife as much as we have. So it'd be very fun to see, and I'll be glad to hear from anyone who's interested.
Great. Call to action, all you teachers out there. Get your students involved in FrogWatch. Really great organization. I know we've heard a little bit from everyone on the projects they're working on, and this is the NMC On the Horizon series, so I'd love to just take a little bit of time to talk about how crowdsourcing is being used in the NMC Horizon project as well, and also how it could potentially be used in the future. For those of you who may not be familiar with the NMC Horizon project and the Horizon Report series, we actually explore and analyze emerging technology uptake across many different learning sectors. And we do this by following a number of technologies, trends, and challenges. But for the reports that we publish that actually track these technologies, the NMC staff doesn't sit there and pick out the topics. I think that the crowdsourcing element we've woven through the Horizon project since its inception in 2002 is we've always convened an expert of panels around the content. So for each report, there's an expert of panels who actually is immersed in a collaborative wiki space, answering prompts and discussing their take on technologies and where they're headed. And then after about a month and a half of those types of asynchronous discussions, we actually crowdsource the topics by allowing the panel members to vote on the technologies, the trends and challenges that they feel will be most disruptive for teaching, learning, and creative inquiry. So that's how we come up with the topics for a report series. And that could have implications and is definitely a scalable methodology for a number of other research initiatives, especially could be helpful at the university level. And one of the additional ways that we use crowdsourcing, I kind of mentioned a little bit at the beginning of this On the Horizon panel, is the projects that are in the reports. So as part of our exploration into emerging technologies, we really like to show how they're being used effectively, to really provide a resource with examples that educators and other people could start emulating, models that are already working, because we know it's really hard to start from scratch when thinking about and implementing a new technology. So the projects that you see on the pages of the Horizon Report mostly come from probably people who are in this audience, people like the people who are in this audience today. We learn about exciting educational technology projects because people submit them to go.nmc.org/projects. So if you are interested in having your groundbreaking innovative project featured in an upcoming Horizon Report to showcase successful implementation of emerging technology, we definitely want to hear about it to bring more visibility to it and really shine a light on it as an example. So make sure to submit your projects. And then another way in the past that we've actually used crowdsourcing, and this is kind of more of a fun thing, just a fun thing to do to make our community as involved as possible, as always, is we have in the past crowdsourced the covers of the report. And the cover of the report is always used year-round in presentations and posted by media outlets and, of course, by us. And so lots of times the covers that you see in the report reflect some of those projects in action, so we're able to highlight exciting EdTech projects right on the cover of the report. So I would love for everyone listening here today to get involved with the Horizon Project, either by serving on an expert panel, and you can do that at go.nmc.org/horizon-nominate, and you could submit a project. That link is go.nmc.org/projects. Now that's how we currently are using crowdsourcing for the Horizon Project. But just some ideas we've kind of tossed around in passing conversations, definitely nothing formal yet, but just thinking in line with how other not-for-profit organizations are using crowdfunding, I personally think it'd be really interesting, the notion of actually crowdfunding a Horizon Report. So we've talked about topics in our reports like museums and libraries, K-12, higher ed, and of course we focus on regions of the world like Europe, Australia, Latin America. But I'm sure that there's other topics where people would really appreciate a lens into emerging technology. So you might very well see in the future some sort of crowdsourced project where people actually select topics for future Horizon Reports and help us fund them and make them happen. So could be something on the horizon. So I realize right now we're probably approaching towards the end of our time here today. So I'd love to give everyone on the panel an opportunity to maybe provide some closing thoughts on the topic of crowdsourcing and crowdfunding. So maybe let's start with you, Emory. Closing thoughts?
I just think that it's an incredibly exciting time. We're just going to see so much happen with this when I see all that's going on right now with the sharing economy, and that I think we will begin sharing knowledge and sharing our resources in much more extensive ways than we have been up to now, and particularly true in higher education and with online learning. I think we're going to go that we just need to collaborate more together and do more with each other as opposed to each doing stuff in our own little silos. So I'm just looking forward to a lot of really great innovative projects out there.
Thanks, Emory. We're looking forward to seeing what's next, too, from College of New Rochelle. And I know you'll actually be speaking further about lots of projects you're working on at the upcoming NMC Summer Conference, just to plug that really quickly. So make sure to come to Emory's session at the NMC Summer Conference in Portland in June. And over to you, Heather, for some closing thoughts.
I want to share with all the teachers on the call, you know, if you're watching this, you're in a position with your own personal crowdsource every time a classroom of children walks into your room. You know, there's your crowd right there to get you started on crowdsourcing. It's a fantastic learning opportunity to start to drive some of these very practical business elements into your curriculum. Think about what you need for your classroom. Think about how it could relevantly relate to what you're doing, like with storytelling or any number of different ways you could relate crowdfunding or crowdsourcing into your curriculum. And go out there, and there's so many free tools. Get involved. So, I'm going to issue a personal invitation to everyone on this webinar to please go to digitalwish.org and make use of those free tools that our nonprofit funds. We've got a fantastic fundraising tool for technology for your classroom, and most of the classrooms I walk in are grossly underfunded and don't have enough technology to be able to do cool things like Skype in the classroom and those types of things. So utilize those free tools from Digital Wish and get on there. It's totally free, and I invite you to take that step and involve your students. It's a fantastic learning journey.
Thanks, Heather. Free is always welcome.
Yeah.
And over to you, Lori.
I've just always been appreciative of the New Media Consortium for playing this really important role, I think, in bringing together both informal and formal learning. And, I kind of come at this from the museum perspective, which, there's different roles to play on both sides, but I think that actually empowers us all to really pull resources in different ways, as Emory mentioned, work together and look beyond what we're currently doing in our own classrooms, in our own universities, and our own museums to really see what's working in different places and apply it to our own. So I just always have appreciated the New Media Consortium for playing that role and kind of helping us break down the silos. So I think that we just need to continue on that path.
Perfect, and thank you so much, Lori. It's always wonderful to have you be part of our community. Last but not least, over to you, Jan, for some closing thoughts.
For any teachers listening, I want to say, especially with our Frog Watch program, it's a great opportunity to have some sort of volunteer hours for any students who are looking to move ahead into higher education, such as colleges that do look for a lot of volunteer hours. We offer that great opportunity to allow that for anybody who's interested. And as far as crowdsourcing, this is a fairly new subject for us, and it's a very good one, and I really, really appreciate it because I can already see that it definitely is putting forth a good effort to involve everybody and getting them closer together and actually collaborate a lot better than we had in the past. So I see a lot of good things coming out of this crowdsourcing that we're doing, and as far as field scope programs that we're running, and I'm always delighted to hear the ideas and suggestions of people outside of my own scientific community. So I really appreciate everybody, and I can't wait to hear from everyone.
Awesome to hear that Jan is looking to crowdsource your ideas. Excellent. Well, this has been a really fabulous and insightful discussion, at least for me, on crowdsourcing, and I hope that it's been helpful to our audience here. Certainly feel free to always email us with follow-up questions for those of you watching to communications@nmc.org, and we're happy to help with anything you might need. I want to personally thank all the panelists for sharing their time and insights with us today. We've loved having you. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you so much, Alex, for being the most gracious and kind host, and Michelle for all your technical support. Thanks for having me on, too. And back over to you, Alex, for some parting words.
On behalf of the NMC, I want to thank our moderator, Sam Becker, Lori Bird Phillips, Emory Craig, Heather Chirtea, and Jan Sutton for taking their time to give us their take on crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, community sourcing, the things that fall under that idea. Participants, if you want more information on anything you saw or heard today, let us know by contacting me directly at alex@nmc.org. To learn more about future NMC on the Horizon programs and get involved in our community, please visit our website at nmc.org. Like us on Facebook or friend us on Twitter at NMCORG. We're going to be taking a break for the next couple months, but we will be back in August for our next season of the NMC on the Horizon. So until then, thanks for joining us. Goodbye.